From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm William Hague. My guest this month is Secretary John Kerry, a man who very nearly became the President of the United States and who served as Obama's Secretary of State, my equivalent when I was Foreign Secretary. We covered all manner of things, like the state of affairs in America.
Politics has failed. The process is not producing results for citizens, average citizens all around the country.
Donald Trump came up, of course.
Is he dangerous in certain regards? Sure, his election would carry with it certain threats, without any question, to democracy itself, to the relationship with other countries.
We also talked about the Israel-Gaza war.
The United States guarantee of security for Israel is inviolable. I mean, it's not going to go away. But that's why President Biden also feels that he has a right to ask for judicious, thoughtful, humane management of how you use a 2,000-pound bomb.
The Story today. Secretary John Kerry reflects. And just a note before we start. This interview was recorded the day before the presidential debate between President Trump and President Biden. It was also before the Supreme Court ruled that Donald Trump has some immunity from prosecution. So that's why I didn't ask John about either of those things. So what a pleasure to have you here, John. You're one of the most extraordinary people I've ever met, actually, and I've met a lot of extraordinary people around the world. I mean, what a record so far in life.
Thank you. On that, I'll just get up and leave.
Yeah, no, that's it. That's the best bit.
Before I screw it up.
But all the things you've done, Navy officers served in Vietnam, 3 Purple Hearts. You've had a long, almost 3 decades in the U.S. Senate. Run for president, nearly became the president of the United States, Secretary of State under President Obama. And I should explain for our British listeners, that's the same as the Foreign Secretary, except in a much more powerful country. That's what you call the Secretary of State. And then representing the Biden administration on climate to the world over the last few years. It's an extraordinary record, but since we're having a U.S. presidential election, let's just start off about reflecting on presidential elections. You came so close, you got more than 48% of the vote against George W. Bush, who had just over 50% of the vote. You nearly became the 43rd president.
Well, actually, in America, the popular vote doesn't count.
But even in your case, the electoral vote, which is what really decides.
Right, electoral. I lost by one state.
Closely matched the popular vote, didn't it?
It does in some ways.
But tell us a little about that experience. So for British people, what it's like to run for president of the United States. You had to fight a lot of disinformation, which has become a bigger problem.
It was the first fake news race, actually.
The Swift
serious way,
episode.
Just a huge amount of lies and scurrilous ads and attacks. But it's a great. I mean, honestly, it's a remarkable experience to have the privilege of running for president and to come as close as I did. I mean, one state was the difference. If Ohio went for me, I was president. Went for Bush, he was president. Mm-hmm. And we obviously do it very differently from you. You have this brilliant 6-week period or whatever, and I think there's some limitations on the money and
yes, absolutely.
And so that's a great way to keep it focused, and everybody focuses for an X period of time. We go through this horrible, long, tortured process, which can actually take 3 to 4 years, depending on how you approach it. And you've got to be out in Iowa or out in New Hampshire or somewhere building an organization, building a structure. And nowadays, building a multi-billion-dollar company, if you will, that's managing people and disposal of money, et cetera. But if you care about the issues, not just getting there and so forth, It can be one of the most rewarding things in the world to have people invest their passion with you. You know what that's like in the field, and to be fighting for values, to be fighting for something that really matters to people and that you think is worth putting yourself on the line for. So I loved that, and then became privileged to become President Obama's Secretary of State, and there, I mean, that is, as you know, because you were my counterpart for a period of time, it's a wonderful, wonderful job.
No, well, I want us to talk about foreign affairs, but just to finish off on your experience in the election, that first fake news that you mentioned, it's a dilemma about how to respond to that. What's your advice for somebody who's attacked with fake news and disinformation? What's
you
the
have to
advice?
spend the time addressing the what is fake. You have to
take it on.
You have to take
not
it on.
try to just
no.
go on without it. Go on
You
and
cannot.
ignore it.
And that was one of the miscalculations made in my campaign, that people kept saying, oh, it's not cutting, don't worry about it. People know the truth. It was in the New York Times. It was in the Washington Post, the truth. But the problem is that's not where people are getting their news necessarily. And particularly now, the vast majority of people get their news from social media. And that's it. And so it's really changed the way you communicate and how you reach people in campaigns.
Does that explain, do you think, what's going on in, if we think about this year's election in the United States? We're only a few months away from
No, very
November
little
5th.
Explains what's going on.
I was hoping you were going to explain it to all the intrigued British voters over here, because we do wonder what's happened
You haven't
to
said that. I
America.
mean, first of all, but we've always wondered what happened to Britain with respect to your incredible tabloid.
Right.
I mean, you have tabloids they have steroids compared to ours. What's happened is politics has failed. The process is not producing results for citizens, average citizens all around the country. And it can be on one thing or another. It could be on health care, it could be on abortion, it could be on migration or whatever, but very passionate things are driving people now in a world that is far more polarized. And it's become far less collegiate than it was. When I was in the Senate, I can remember going to dinner at Ted Kennedy's house in Virginia, and Orrin Hatch, Republican conservative from Utah, would be there, and Senator Mac Mathias from Maryland, Republican, would be there. And you had wonderful shared conversations, and even the next day you could go back to the Senate and pick up on one of the conversations about one issue or another. That doesn't happen now. Rare. And partly because people don't have time, William. They're all out there raising money every weekend, and it's really not a great, healthy democratic process in that regard.
And let me ask you two other things about the U.S. election this year. The one about Trump and one about President Biden. On Trump, personally, I'm very worried about Donald Trump. Everybody running in the British election this year has to be very polite about it, because whoever wins, they have to work with whoever is the U.S. administration. Of course they have. But someone like me who's no longer running for office, I can say, this is very worrying. This could be a disastrous event for the world. Now, other people say, no, well, Trump last time wasn't so bad. We got through that period. What should we think? Is he a real danger to the world? Or could we get through it again somehow, 4 years of Trump?
Well, it clearly will present its extremely dicey moments, because that's the nature of the man. And he is not studious with respect to issues. He doesn't read a great deal. He is not particularly curious to gather a lot of information the way most leaders do before they try to make a decision. But he's is he dangerous in certain regards? Sure, his election would carry with it certain threats, without any question, to democracy itself, to the relationship with other countries, if you just draw from the past experience. I mean, he attacked NATO relentlessly and bitterly. NATO has proven to be a very, very key component of refortifying the values on which all of Europe and the world organized itself after World War II. the United States of America and our allies turned around and rebuilt the countries that had declared war on us. Today, two of our strongest allies are Japan and Germany. And you know, you have to have big vision and strength of the confidence of the vision that you're putting on the table. Winston Churchill had that vision. Others, you know, we have to stand up in the same way today. I mean, for the United States of America to not support Ukraine, where they're prepared to do the dying, they're prepared to do the fighting, and have been and are, and we're going to say, hey, sorry, folks, we just got to, you know, we're going to take care of America first. Well, you will not take care of America or any other country in the world if you don't sustain the values that we've lived by for this long period of time. And it would be disastrous. Putin would feel empowered. Who knows what happens in the Baltics? Who knows what would happen in Eastern Europe? It would be the invitation of a lifetime to some despot, to the next, you know, demagogue, fascist who comes along. So I think we're in a very, very important time. Now, I happen to believe that Ukraine will resolve itself somehow. I can't tell you it's going to resolve itself with, you know, a victory. I don't necessarily believe that that's in the cards for anybody. I think you have to have you know, some kind of a diplomatic outcome that each can sort of claim what they need to claim to make it passable, or you might have a frozen conflict, not an impossibility, or you know, you have a disaster and someone, I mean, wins outright. But you know, those are the only real possibilities.
Just to finish off on the U.S. election, because I agree with you really, and therefore, you know, somebody like me actually wants Biden to win. We don't want Trump to win. I don't want Trump to win, but Joe Biden, you know, there is the age question. Now you're 80. You are.
I'm 80,
you're
and I got news
80.
for you. I got news for you. It's the new 60.
Yeah, well, that's extremely reassuring news because I'm
maybe
63,
even 55.
And you don't slow down at all. But the president of the United States might be 85. You know, at the end of the next term. Is that do you see that?
Not as long
problem?
as his mind and you know, his capacity to fulfill the role of the presidency with energy and with focus is there. The age number is not what's important. It's, is he performing? Is he delivering? And the answer to that is yes. His legislative record is really amazing. $1.2 trillion for an infrastructure bill to rebuild some of the infrastructure of America. You know, billions for the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the best environmental legislation that's passed since 1970 with Richard Nixon. I mean, you know, there's just an amazing amount. Medicare is now cheaper. Joe Biden's done an extraordinary job of strengthening NATO, managing very difficult conflicts around the planet, not just the ones in Ukraine and Gaza. None of it's simple, but he's avoided World War III, and he's got a lot of people clear about what we will do and what we won't do, which helps prevent accidents. When you have a leader who's brandishing nuclear weapons, you've got to be thoughtful and cautious, and I think the president's done an outstanding job.
I think he's done a great job, although I didn't agree with the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which I think had some disastrous consequences. But overall, I think, particularly in foreign affairs, he's done a great job. But I do wonder whether we need, you know, the new John Kerry or the new Barack Obama to come up there in the Democrat
They
Party.
will. You know, I mean, your country decided after the war that, you know, Winston Churchill had served a purpose, and you moved on. And I suspect at some point in time, Americans will. But for the moment, we have a choice between Donald Trump and President Biden. And that choice is so stark. It is so clear. And in so many ways, President Trump has assaulted the Constitution of the United States. I mean, even his daughter said he lost the election, and he knew it. Even his chief of staff did. Even his vice president did. And notwithstanding that, he went out and ginned up his supporters, knowing in the weeks preceding, as we see with emails and other records, that he knew exactly what he was doing. And even when that attack on the seat of American democracy was taking place, he sat in that little room beside the Oval Office in the White House and watched television, never lifted the phone, never did a damn thing to try to protect the Constitution and see that those people didn't rip away the ability to be able to choose a president by the electors' votes being counted. And Mitch McConnell said it was the responsibility of the president. You can run a list of Republicans who stood up the day after and said, a bridge too far, we're not supporting this, enough is enough. A lot of them have come back, I understand that. But I'm sticking with what the truth is here. The truth is clear that this man did not defend the Constitution of the United States. That was his fundamental duty as president. And I think that people need to be reminded of that.
I certainly agree. They need to be reminded of that. And one of the factors in the election is the conflict in the Middle East that is causing issues within the Democrat Party. And it's an immense issue on its own, of course, in world affairs. And I particularly wanted to ask you about this because nobody did more to try to resolve this. If you recall, when you were nominated as Secretary of State, taking over from Hillary Clinton, I was on it. We met at the British Embassy, and I said, you are the one who is going to do the two-state solution. We will all back you up. This is the moment for America to really bring things together in the Middle East. And you describe in your book how you went to the president, and he said he was skeptical, but if that's what you wanted to do, you were free to do it. And I don't think anybody spent more time with Netanyahu and then with the Palestinian leadership. It was a huge effort. And yet even then, with all that, with all your experience and relationships and the power of America, it didn't come about. Now, what is the lesson in this situation now with Gaza? What has that taught us about the way forward? Is there any prospect at all now of a two-state solution and resolving the issues in the Middle East?
The answer is yes, there is a prospect of it, but it's not going to happen suddenly and quickly. If it happens, I did spend hours with the Prime Minister, and I spent hours with President Abbas and with the Palestinians and with others in the region. And you know full well that one of the most important ingredients of success in foreign policy, if not also in other policies, but particularly in foreign policy, you need ripeness. Ripeness is a very big issue. You can't make something happen where that country or that leader just isn't willing to move. And in the case here, you had two leaders who, it turned out, talked a game but were not willing to move. President Abbas dropped many an opportunity to be able to move forward. President Obama gave him an opportunity in the Oval Office, said, get back to me in 5 days, and he never got back to him. And by the same token, Prime Minister Netanyahu kept saying, well, take my excuses away. Take my, the reasons I have reservations away. And mostly was security. So I asked the president to allow Marine General John Allen, who had been our commanding officer in Afghanistan, to take over its job of trying to piece together a security arrangement for Israel that was fail-safe, that was just as strong as it could be. And we had 150 people from the Defense Department, the Homeland Security, the FBI, the CIA, everybody at the table, working to make sure that each jot and tittle that you needed to cover was spoken to here. That Israel's border on Jordan was spoken to, Hezbollah. How were you going to build security within the West Bank itself, and have Shin Bet and Mossad and IDF, all of them working together to provide information that you could act on and to build a civil society, which over time would give people confidence you can have a state. It just doesn't happen because you say, oh, there's a state tomorrow. Now, even more so because of October 7th, the body politic of Israel is not in that place. And so it'd be silly to just say, oh, you're going to do a state tomorrow. But here's the challenge. I was working during that period of time with a cabinet around Bibi Netanyahu where nobody was supportive of a state. And so the threat to Bibi was his coalition would fall apart if he actually did what he said he was willing to do, which was step up and be willing to lose his coalition. Well, it turned out he wasn't willing to, and there are other.
And now he's got the same problem again with
I think it's going to be extremely
right
difficult.
Cabinet,
Well, the current government is that look. I mean, there are a whole bunch of items that make it not ripe. So you have to build that ripeness, and now it's going to take some time because you also have to physically rebuild Gaza. But you can't just physically rebuild Gaza to be under the same control of Hamas or other people. So you have to have a bigger plan for how you're going to move forward afterwards. I think all of these things are doable if you have people who really want to do them.
But they don't want to do them at the moment. And what do you think about opinion in America? There are many young people on university campuses and elsewhere who've taken up Palestinian cause. Is Israel in danger of losing the support of a younger generation of Americans, given that Israel does rely absolutely on the United States for its future security? Is that something Israel needs to remember now?
The United States guarantee of security for Israel is inviolable. I mean, it's not going to go away. But that's why President Biden also feels that he has a right to ask for judicious, thoughtful, humane management of how you use a 200 to 2,000 pound bomb, where you drop it, and when and how and so forth. And that's what the president's been pressing here, is that you have to bring the world along with you. You can't just be doing things that isolate yourself and everybody else. The fact is, anti-Semitism has grown. There is an ugliness at large, released in many places. You see it in France, you see it in Germany, you see it in Italy, you see it in some of the Eastern European countries. You certainly see it in our country. And you've seen this uneasy relationship that Donald Trump had with the white nationalists and others. Not a healthy way to be bringing people together and behave as President of the United States. Directly opposite of something like what somebody as great as Abraham Lincoln did and put himself on the line to protect. And you look at the gulf between those folks and you say, what's happened?
Yeah. Which leaves the only way forward, diplomacy, which you worked on, and reminds me of Iran as well at that time. We made some progress with Iran. It's one of the things we worked on together.
You know what, William? I want to stop you there for a minute, because the Iran thing, Donald Trump pulling out of the Iran nuclear agreement, is one of the single most damaging, dangerous things he could do ever. It's monumental, because he took a nuclear weapon that had been taken off the shelf.
Right.
We had unbelievable level of penetration of visibility on that program. We had radio-controlled signals being sent from centrifuges. They had to destroy all their modern centrifuges, and we left them with the 5,000 oldest centrifuges. We had television cameras on their mining, on their milling, on their yellowcake. I mean, every aspect of that was covered. But instead, he just pulled out, and in the pulling out, sent the message to the Ayatollah, hey, you were right. He said, he continually said to Foreign Minister Zarif and to President Rouhani, I don't trust these guys. The great Satan can't be trusted.
You couldn't rely on America.
And you can't rely on America, and I'll let you negotiate, but I don't have any confidence this is going to hold. And lo and behold, he was proven right. And that's what elected the IRGC. Donald Trump was critical in electing the IRGC and put the Revolutionary Guard in. So look, you got to call it the way it is and tell the truth to people. And the truth is that was a really dangerous and stupid thing to do.
I think we're illustrating the answer to my earlier question: is Trump really a danger? or not?
Well,
Because,
it's better to rather than just saying yes, better to explain to people
yes.
why.
No, it is, and since we were there negotiating it together, I mean, it had its farcical moments, as you probably remember when we made the agreement with the Iranians. Our Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, had a bottle of champagne hidden under the table and was about to open it as the Iranians came in, and we said, "Put it away. They don't drink. You know, what are you playing at here?" So it had its weird moments negotiating
There were
that
some
deal.
very funny moments.
But it was a robust deal, as you say, and now it's not there. So now we have to worry again
Well,
about the Iranian nuclear.
now
Do you see the Iranians developing a nuclear weapon? They're
I
much
do
closer
not,
to it
I
now.
do not think they want to cross that line. Certainly not at this point in time. They don't. Depends what happens in terms of Hezbollah and Israel and Hamas in the region and the war. I think there are a lot of interdependencies here that are very, very challenging and even threatening. And we have to have wise leadership like Joe Biden has provided the world. And the whole world has a stake in that wisdom being in the Oval Office.
It certainly does. And we're facing now, at that time, we're now facing something different from at that time. And then the Russians were helping us with Iran. The Chinese were helping us a fair bit with Iran. And North Korea was almost a separate issue, in which we were still entitled to expect the help of those countries as well. But we're now seeing all those countries working together much more closely, pushed together by Russia needs artillery ammunition from North Korea, and it needs drones made in Iran. Yeah. And Russians now need to sell their gas to China, and they need whatever they can get from China. And we're seeing this, what's rather crudely called this CRINC alliance of China and Russia and Iran and North Korea, even joint naval exercises off the Red Sea.
Well, they've got
China,
nobody else to work with them, William. So,
but it's a new dynamic in world affairs, and a dangerous one in world affairs compared to when we were around, isn't it?
yes, it is. It does carry its dangers. But I still believe, based on the conversations I've had over the last 4 years, I think I was the one person in the Biden administration that had the most uninterrupted relationship with Chinese leadership.
Yes.
And we succeeded even in the midst of all these other important issues, ranging from Hong Kong to Taiwan to Uyghurs, to Kim Jong-un, to nuclear weapons, to access to the marketplace, theft of intellectual property. I mean, you can run a long list, and they're all legitimate issues. But the fact is that climate doesn't go away for anybody, and remains a serious existential threat to the world. So even there, we were able to keep moving and got an agreement out of the Chinese. I believe if we were to engage China in a number of different ways at this point in time, I think China ultimately would like to find a way to do things that lower the tensions and begin to find a pathway of cooperation.
Right. Well, that is a more hopeful note to strike. And you said, and I want to come to the whole climate, because you really achieved something extraordinary with China in the last few years on climate, because the whole COP process, without what you agreed with China, would really have had no momentum about it.
We wouldn't be able to move.
We would have had no momentum.
But now China is producing, manufacturing, and deploying more renewables than all the rest of the world put together, William. That's what they're doing. So people, yes, they're the largest emitter in the world, but they now realize they're going to have to speed up and do more. And, likewise, we have to too. We're the second largest emitter in the world. But we reduced our emissions 4% last year, even while we grew our economy 2.5%. So I think that, we're not just talking through our hat. We have an ability to be able to deliver.
And how do you see this has been your passionate work of the last few years, and diplomatic work on climate? You've made those agreements with China. There's been some progress at the various COPs in recent years. But the world's still going in the wrong direction overall, isn't it? We're getting close to we're around about the 1.5 degree temperature increase. We're bumping up against that.
Well, I
already.
think we're going to probably go through that, but I think we can claw back from it. But look, William, the fact is that we've really got to be truthful to ourselves about what is happening here. Yes, I've been passionate about it and I pursue it, but I do so because I believe very deeply that the science is telling us we have to do that. I mean, you consider the Enlightenment of several centuries ago, where science sort of gained a new foothold in the world after the great earthquake of Portugal and Lisbon, which wiped out 40,000 people. And that earthquake prompted a huge debate throughout Europe about whether or not that was the act of a vengeful God punishing people for the bad lives they were leading, or whether it was science, that the tectonic plates moved and the plates moved and created a tsunami and so forth. And Voltaire and Rousseau and these folks all had a huge debate about the age of reason and science and whether it would be preeminent. So we've learned through the last century, going to the moon, dealing with COVID, doing that. Yeah, science does matter. And science is what we are basing our decisions on, not whim and fancy or ideology. And the science tells us we got a few years left within which to try to bring those emissions down, or we will suffer the worst consequences of the climate crisis, which is growing worse and worse by the day. Yeah. The last 12 months have been the worst 12 months in human history. Each month succeeding has been hotter than the one preceding. We now see storms that eclipse anything we've seen before in their intensity. Why? Because 90% of the warming of the planet goes into the ocean. The ocean's warming. The warming of the ocean puts more moisture in the air, goes around the planet and drops in these torrential rainstorms, which an insurance guy told me the other day, they're losing $100 billion a year just with these pop-up storms. So my passion is not sort of about just an issue. My passion is about truth and common sense and threat to life. And if we want to join in a sort of unsigned, unwritten suicide pact, you can do the business as usual that a lot of people are currently choosing to do. Oil and gas companies particularly, who say, oh, we're going to be able to reduce the emissions. Well, they can't yet sufficiently. Not at a scale and a cost that will be borne by taxpayers and be able to function. They will not be competitive with the new technologies. And by the way, the true cost of coal burning has never been properly put into the cost of coal. Coal is not just digging it and bringing it out of the ground and selling it. It's black lung disease. It's 7 million of people a year who die around the world because of the bad quality of air, because of the particulates. It's the destruction of the ocean chemistry, because all of that rain that falls in the ocean is highly acidic, and it's changing the chemistry as a result. The warming of the ocean, with 90% of all the heating going into the ocean. So I'm fighting here for grandchildren and children and common sense based on science about what we need to be doing.
Now, I wish we could put you in front of everybody. Well, there'll be a lot of people listening to this who are inspired and motivated by that. Many politicians struggle with it, don't they? Because you come up against the resistance of the voter and the consumer with communicating that and carrying it through. So across Europe at the moment, we see governments who get into trouble over, you have to replace your boiler in Germany. Oh, we'll go back on that. And here in the UK, we've had, you have electric vehicles from 2030 or maybe 2035. The government struggled with that. Yeah. And so and in the United States, you have maybe half the electorate about to vote for somebody who says, drill, baby, drill. Yeah. Right? So even in the democratic world, where people have a lot of information and they can see that science, it's still really difficult to motivate people to do enough.
But what's ironic about that, William, is I can understand the irony if, in fact, life on the other side of that was harder and worse. But it's not. Cleaner air is good for everybody in the country. We used to call it pollution, you remember? And we have to find a way to show people What's better? What's better is the new technologies that are cleaner, that don't complicate life for people with heart disease or emphysema or whatever. That the air will be cleaner. You will be healthier. There will be less cancer. We will spend less money on health care generally because people can be healthier. We will be safer because we don't have to send troops to some part of the world to fight to defend the oil lines or the rigs or whatever.
But when you look at all that, then are you still optimistic or hopeful that we can achieve this? That will, by 2050, we will have attained, the world will have attained all the targets set at COP? Or are we going to be in more of a crisis where we overshoot the 1.5 degrees and we end up with more geoengineering, more carbon capture?
Most scientists will tell you that in order to really protect the planet over the long term, you can't just get to net zero 2050. You have to actually suck about 1.6 trillion tons of carbon out of the atmosphere. And that we just don't know how to do right now. But what the IEA tells us is, this is really important, if we do the things we said we would do in Glasgow, in Sharm el-Sheikh, in Dubai,
then it would work.
The IEA tells us you would be at 1.8 degrees on just Glasgow, you would be at 1.7 degrees with Sharm el-Sheikh, and you can get lower even now with Dubai. So we could win the battle. It's not a lack of capacity, William. It's a lack of political will. It's a lack of imagination. It's a lack of commitment to the finance necessary to make it happen.
And you are one of the most powerful voices in the world on this. What's your next step? You stepped back as President Biden's climate envoy, but you're not going to stop on this subject, are you? You are really going at this.
Well, what do? Walk away and say, "Oh, too bad, our kids are going to all, get schnockered by this"? No, I'm not willing to do that. But I've come to a point where after 3 years of being the envoy, where we changed the policy, where we won a massive change in Dubai, where 200 nations signed on to say that we must move away from fossil fuel. We have to accelerate it in this decade. We have to have plans to reach net zero 2050. Everybody has to. And we must do this according to the science, which means 1.5 degrees has to be the target. So if you do those things now, we can win the battle. No government is going to do that, is going to be responsible for making all that happen. The private sector will do it. I truly believe that the marketplace will make these decisions as more and more people say, I want to make my contribution. I want to buy an EV. I want to have a house that's energy efficient. I don't want a gas burner. I'm going to use a heat pump. The marketplace, the greatest growth in the heat pump market was in Poland, 100 and some percent increase, and in Maine, in the United States of America. And those are two cold places, and they heat. That works for people. So the more we can do to get people to see that the solutions don't mean giving up things you love, and you love a warm house. You don't love the coal and the coal dust that made it warm.
Right.
So if you can get rid of that and still be warm, let's go for it, folks. So I think this is the greatest economic opportunity. I'm going to push in the private sector, try to mobilize the capital, deploy the capital, accelerate the transition. It's the only way we win this battle now.
To draw our conversation together, when you take all these things together, the condition of America, the state of international relations, conflict in some places, the hopes and dangers on climate, then there's the arrival of artificial intelligence as well. I saw an interview with Professor Eric Brynjolfsson of Stanford, who's a professor of AI, recently, who said, this could be the best decade ever in human history, or it could be one of the worst. And the fact we don't know which of those it's going to be is the great challenge of leadership. Do you agree with that we're in that now in that position where it could be the best ever, or it could be one of the worst?
I can't say that I know enough to be able to say what the time span would be. But I can say that looking at the possibilities of what it's going to bring, it will be monumental change, which will be impacting every aspect of life. already is impacting major things. I mean, you use it inadvertently. You may not know it, but you're using AI when you do searches nowadays. And there are a lot of other impacts. It will affect work, labor, costs, benefits. There will be discussion of new relationships between workers and the marketplace that people have avoided for years. It's huge in what it's going to produce. The key is obviously to make sure that we're taming the worst components of it. And we don't always do the best job as humans of taming bad forces when we know we ought to be.
So are you, at the end of all that, are we going to be okay? One of the things people often ask me, they just say, are we going to be okay? And they mean all of this. Climate.
Absolutely,
AI.
I agree. All of it is what is on the table. No question about it. The answer is I do believe, yes. I really do believe that. I think we will break this fever. We will find a way, as we did with COVID, when we had to be and we had to move, and we really needed to get out there. We summoned the private sector to the table. We unleashed the power of that market, and it worked. I think we can do the same thing here.
Well, let's hope the world will be okay. And the fact you think we can be so is encouraging, given your immense experience.
Here's the deal, to quote my president. We have the ability to do these things. Most of these problems are human created. And as President Kennedy used to remind us, if it's human created, you can human solve the problem. But you have to have leaders, and you have to have a vision that wants to do that puts reasonable ideas for how you do it in front of people, that listens to people, that collectively brings people to the table in building a solution. You can't do it by edict, and it's not going to work if you divide in order to conquer. So I think that I do believe we can do it. Yes, I do believe it very, very much. We've been through some pretty destructive periods in our own politics over our history. If you go back and look at some of the campaigns in the 1700s, 1800s, people called each other pretty bad things.
Oh, we've had some rather rude ones as well.
You've had some bad ones.
We've always finished up having a healthy democracy.
Yeah, we usually chop off a few heads. We don't do that.
Only of kings, and a few others actually. But John Kerry, thank you so much, my old friend and colleague. Thank you very much for joining me on this podcast for the Times and Sunday Times. It's been such a pleasure to talk about those things.
Great to be with you.
Great to see you in London. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
That was Secretary John Kerry, formerly President Obama's Secretary of State and President Joe Biden's climate envoy. Today's producer was Olivia Case. The executive producers are Kate Ford and Fiona Leach. Sound design and theme composition was by Mao Losetto. And I'm William Hague. If you've enjoyed this episode, you might like our previous one, Rafa, Red Lines, and the Biden presidency. There's a link to it in the description of this podcast. Do leave us a review, it helps others find us. And if you'd like to get in touch, it's thestory@thetimes.com. See you next time when I'll be talking all things Olympics with my old friend, Seb Coe, the man who brought the Olympics to Britain in 2012.